Hey, welcome to Office Hours. I'm glad you stopped in. I am so excited to talk about this topic today. We're talking about OpenAI in the context of business applications. This is a technology that is not only transformational, but one has caused every business to think about how it can become part of how they deliver their mission to their customers. And the number one scenario that comes up is these sort of chat bot driven experiences, which there's so many broad opportunities to be able to apply. Whether it's internal documents or direct chatbots that are put in front of a customer, or these ways of surfacing data that someone can ask questions about in order for them to be able to understand the business better. But what we're going to talk about today is how OpenAI's capabilities can be built into an application itself. So when you're building a custom app and you're thinking about how that app can be delivered to your customers and provide more data or more value, think about the app as really a platform to deliver capabilities driven by OpenAI. So we're going to kind of cover a couple of those scenarios today, and I want you to just get exposure to that. So the first scenario that I want you to be able to understand is when you integrate that chat experience into a much more immersive world. So think about like you build a chat experience for helping to understand the machine manuals that you're building or you have in place. You have a boat that someone has questions about, or a car that someone has questions about. Well, you could build a chatbot that answers questions about the boater's manual or the truck manual or the machine that they're repairing, and to be able to then surface answers to those questions, maybe even in different languages, back to consumers that are trying to answer those questions. And those could be customer service reps, or they could be people who are just everyday consumers like you or I. But once you get past that sort of POC stage, what organizations are doing is taking that capability and building that inline into their core business applications. So if it's sales, you're seeing Microsoft do this with Copilot for Dynamics. You can do the same thing in a core application that you've built. So for example, if you have a core application that customer service uses to take the calls and register that the call is happening and take notes as they're listening to the customer, what we're seeing is that businesses are integrating the OpenAI's call and response activities right within the interface. So as I'm talking to the person on the phone, I'm taking the notes, I'm interacting, I'm pulling that information in, that's popping up right into the interface that I'm using. Or if I'm a repair tech, I'm physically at the customer site, I'm putting in my call log about what I'm experiencing and seeing, boom, it's starting to provide me with the information I need at my fingertips, versus me having to search for it and then have it find answers. It's starting to give me the answers directly right within the interface that I'm using to be able to provide a faster result to my end customer, which is the person I'm ultimately helping, being a repair technician, or the business I'm helping being a repair technician. So what you can see is that that chat experience is sort of a initial entry point into the space. And then you're building on that by building that directly into the customer experience. We've seen other scenarios where it's built straight into a, say, Outlook experience. Maybe that's where they're living all day long. So then rather than having them go to another chat space, we're building the chat experience directly into the Outlook interface, where maybe they get the request, that gets turned into something and then prepared for an individual to be able to respond with it in a structured way, rather than it being something that's like, okay, cool, I got this, copy it, paste it into the bot, have it respond to me, then copy it back out into some other tool, have that respond to me and send it back to the customer. That's already faster, perhaps, than what I was doing before, but it's not providing as much value as if I were just integrated right into the platform itself. And that's what we're seeing companies do. So that's sort of scenario one. Scenario two would be areas where you're sort of like these back-end data cleansing processes. I have all this stuff happening behind the scenes that I have data abnormalities in, or I have data validation, things that you can only validate with a human that knows something about the business. And that's the unique thing about a lot of these scenarios, is that what makes us so powerful is we're training a platform to understand the language of the business. Well, what happens when that bot knows the language of the business? Well, then I can use it to be able to do some really incredible things on data cleansing and availability, where I say point it at this data and have it indicate whether this is good or bad data, or it's duplicate, or it's the wrong thing, based upon knowledge of other pieces of data it's gotten from the business. And then it can help to establish certified data sets that are much more relevant and cleansed than what we had before. So why that's important is because ultimately that's something that fulfills the application properties back out to your customers. So if I'm delivering something that's worthwhile and is the right kind of data, the user experience that my customer is getting is going to be much more satisfying to them. If it understands food, it's going to be able to better satisfy that through an app. If it understands machine parts, it's going to be able to better group them for the customer. So all of this data cleansing experience that might happen behind the scenes, sometimes injecting a chat experience, not the chat itself, but the understanding, quote unquote, of the business and its relationship to that data is a huge win. So that's a really interesting story that we hadn't thought of before until it started coming up with customers. So that's scenario 2. Scenario 3 is this idea of integrating into customer-facing apps. So let's say I'm building an application, and that application surfaces an ordering experience. And in that ordering experience, there's a couple different ways that I might surface ChatGPT-based capabilities. So the first would be that I simply want to allow a person to interact with a personal buyer, personal seller sort of experience. Like, hey, this is what I'm looking for. What are some options that align to that? Usually the search experiences are really dumb. Like, it gives me a list of things. That list of things is sort of loosely associated with the way that I searched for it, but it still requires me to do a lot of the work to find that ultimate outcome. What if my experience was more like, I'm looking for a sweater that feels this way, and it's kind of this mid sort of temperature sort of experience. I want it to be okay for spring, but not too hot. All these sort of things, right? So I'm going to explain this to the chat experience. That's going to then provide me with recommendations of particular products that I could buy. Maybe even group them with other products that are more highly tuned to the things that I want versus things that are very specific to kind of a generic search experience. And you see a little bit of that happening in Amazon today, but certainly not to the extent that integrating really a true sort of chat-driven experience of shopping or chat-driven experience of picking out products would really help. Like, essentially could be a co-pilot of shopping for clothes, or a co-pilot of buying an add-on for your boat or truck, right? This idea of building this straight into the experience the customer is experiencing. And it doesn't have to be like a huge risk either, because this can be an add-on to other things, like start shopping with bot one, right? And have it start to provide you with recommendations. If it's better or worse, A/B testing, you start to shift more people over to that experience. So that's sort of experience 2. In that context, it could even be B2B, when you're looking at the idea of like, I'm buying products from for things that fulfill my supply chain. And that could be even an explaining a situation sort of conversational view. Or if I'm a middleman that provides things for producing other products, it can start to provide me with the best product mix of availability, composite of what I usually buy, what I might want to buy in the future, maybe what other companies are doing better or worse than me, starting to provide me with best practices via that experience as well. That's something that the AI experience can truly impact. So that's another sort of building into the app experience I think is really powerful. The next would be scenarios like even descriptions and video analysis. So I've several customers that are looking at this idea of doing video analysis projects. And you think like, that's not really a ChatGPT, OpenAI story. Interestingly enough, it kind of is. So yes, you might be using like more cognitive services oriented video analysis tools to be able to produce the initial identification of objects. But what can come up in these scenarios is like labeling, descriptions, talking about what's happening in the context of the customer. And you might be combining some of the other object detection scenarios with, tell me about what's happening in this picture. You already seen GPT-4 can say, yeah, I've got monkeys hanging on the back of a truck and it's raining and this is weird. Like, that's not something that object analysis does for you, but it is something that OpenAI can do. And if you combine those two things together, you start to be able to represent like descriptive information of the story in conjunction with object identification and very detailed object identification in the story. You bring those two things together, you get to a point where you can say, Tell me about all the scenarios where I had monkeys hanging on the back of the cars in the rain. Like, what a weird scenario. Like, object detection probably wouldn't have been able to figure that out, but this could. Or something maybe more useful, like tell me about all the scenarios where people are driving through red lights without wearing their seatbelt. Maybe those are the people I want to go after first because I got their license plate. Whatever it is, right? These are scenarios that you can combine capabilities together to be able to arrive at really powerful outcomes for customers. The next scenario would be the sort of search box space. Most apps have a search box, right? So I'm building a menu, or I'm building a window ordering experience or customer service experience to know where things are going to be delivered or when they're going to be delivered. That initial search box can be really simple for the cases of like finding a part number or something like that. But imagine if that search box is not just a search box, but it's actually a chat-centric window. So when I ask it questions, I can go beyond simply putting a part number in there. I can go beyond that. I can ask questions that would be centric to my order, have it answer those questions in the context of the information it already knows, and provide me with the detailed readout below. So start to like approximate a customer service rep always being there for a person who's ordering or getting customer support from you right within the interface. So rather than have this like, I've got an interface and it provides some information, and then I have a separate experience to get customer support, let's build this right in the same interface and provide them with an always-on customer support ecosystem right within the app. Whether it's a mobile device or it's a full kind of web app, doesn't really matter. This idea of surfacing that and helping them to be able to get value from it is really important and really capable right now. So those are really interesting stories and ones that I'm seeing so much power around, things that you haven't really seen all this acceleration happening in the past. I'd say the last experience, and this is really certainly not the only, we're probably going to do a part 2 or a part 3 or part 4 of this, is this scenario where like you have a back-end process. You have a back-end process that's building, that maybe the app itself is more about processing data than it is about surfacing data. Like it's looking for scenarios where something's wrong or off, or and you do a lot of like sort of if-then statements to be able to achieve that goal. So if that's your product, and I build a lot of these if-then statements and things sort of fit into those if-thens, but it's never ending. I'm always building if-thens. AI is sort of like a really complicated if-then, but it also is a lot smarter at achieving the goals that you're trying to lay out for it, like looking for fraud or looking for situations that the cart looks messed up or the quality looks off. All of these are centric to things that I can train good and bad, correct and not correct, based around some quality controls that rather than just doing it based upon if-thens, like is this the right composite mix of things that you would buy, I can start to train a model that's a little bit smarter than that. And instead of constantly building if-then statements, I'm really creating a model that has, to a certain degree, you're still always retraining, but you're able to cover a much broader set of capabilities, and you're not having to care about quite as many of the nuances of the if-then itself. The tricky thing that comes up with some of these is when the if-thens are tied to highly regulated industries. And that's where, it can get a little odd because you have to be able to prove that you did certain things. And in this case, you might actually be adding this in addition to what you did before. Now that's where black box comes into play, and you need to be able to show what's happening within the model and explainability. And I guess you get to a question of whether you ever really have explainability. But all of that combined together really creates opportunities for high degrees of optimization within processes that people would typically do and maybe not always have all the energy to be able to do correctly, or they just simply can't because they can only cover so many if-then statements. So many opportunities, whether it's customer front end, it's middle tier like customer service for both customer B2B, B2C, or it's back-end data integration, apps that do data integration. OpenAI has so many opportunities, and we're seeing this come up every single day. Like if you're not talking about OpenAI in your business right now, somebody wants to, because it is this tremendous transformation of the way we execute on our company's mission. So thanks for stopping in. I hope you found a lot of value in just talking about some of the ideas of integrating OpenAI into apps, and I'll look forward to seeing you next week on the Tech Leadership Office Hours.